Keith Thurman fires back at Terence Crawford, tells him he beat an Errol Spence that was a shell of himself, and exposes what really went on when they tried to make a Keith Thurman and Terence Crawford fight. Let's talk about it, but before we do, make sure that you hit my like button and subscribe to the channel if you're not already subbed to the channel. So Bud Crawford is out here on his high horse. He acting like a that ain't never had ish. You know what I'm talking about? He out here running around on some 99 and boo-boo shit once again, telling Keith Thurman, telling Danny Garcia they'll never get a fight with him. He running around, now he's telling Errol Spence, F what I told you, I don't owe you nothing, and I'm not fighting you at 154, it's 147 or nothing. So he out here on his high horse acting a damn fool. He had a whole bunch of disrespectful things to say about Keith Thurman. You know, out of the blue, Keith Thurman wasn't really saying nothing about him, but saying that, hey, you know, if you want to fight the best, Terence Crawford, come fight me. He was asking for a fight with Bud Crawford. But now, Bud, he feels disrespected because another fighter is asking to fight him. And he goes on Twitter and he goes off. He throws Danny Garcia in it, and Danny Garcia ain't said nothing about Terence Crawford. So I don't know what's wrong with Bud. This man is having outbursts for no reason. He acting like a spoiled white kid in the suburbs. You know what I'm talking about? That cuss out their parents and throw fits because they got a Honda instead of the brand new Mercedes-Benz. You know what I'm saying? That's how Bud Crawford ran around here acting. But let's talk about some of the things that Keith Thurman had to say to Bud Crawford in return. Now, Keith Thurman, he's saying that, hey, I watched the fight between you and Errol Spence, and Errol Spence wasn't the same. Errol Spence was not the same fighter. He's saying that that version of Errol Spence wouldn't have beat Danny Garcia. That version of Errol Spence wouldn't have beat Sean Porter. And if that version of Errol Spence would have fought me, I would have did the same thing to him that you did. Now, the thing is when it comes to a situation like this, right, it get real sticky. But to keep it real, if you've seen Errol Spence fight throughout his career, right, if you want to keep it real, a lot of y'all are just Bud Protection Committee members, you know what I'm saying, the BPC. Y'all, you know what I'm saying, y'all deride Bud with everything he do. Y'all don't hold his feet to the fire with none of the contradictions and none of the lies that he tells, so you're not going to keep it real. So for the ones that are going to keep it real, one thing that we noticed in that Spence fight, that Spence was not the same. I mean, Bud was knocking Spence down with a jab. You know, Spence looked much slower. He just didn't look like the same fighter. You know, can't nobody convince me that David I've been sneezing and Green Machine are better fighters than Errol Spence, because they put on much better performances against Terence Crawford than Errol Spence did. Actually, if you really want to keep it 100, if you go back to Amir Khan put on a much better performance against Terence Crawford than Errol Spence did. So you can't convince me that those fighters are better than Errol Spence. And looking at the fight, you can tell that Errol Spence wasn't himself. The only thing he really had going for himself in that fight was his heart. You know what I'm saying? The man is a dog. He got a whole bunch of heart, and that's something that you can't teach. So he still had that in him. That's why he was able to last, I think to the 8th round, whatever round he got stopped in, the 8th or the 9th round, right? That's why he was able to last that long, because of the heart. You know what I'm saying? Other than that, he had nothing going for him in that fight. So when you look at the situation, Keith Thurman, when he says that Errol Spence wasn't the same fighter, you got to admit he has a valid point. Although you don't want to take credit away from Terence Crawford, because whatever was going on with Spence is not Terence Crawford's fault, and I understand that. The only thing Crawford is supposed to do is come in there prepared and be the best him that he can be. And that's what he did. So you don't want to take the credit away from Terence Crawford, but anybody with two eyes can see that Errol Spence on that night was not the best version of himself, and he was not the same fighter. Keith Thurman also goes as far as to say that version of Errol Spence is not a world champion. that he couldn't beat any world champion, right? Let alone have 3 titles. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to play y'all a clip and let y'all hear some of what Keith Thurman had to say. And then when we come back, I'm going to talk about what Keith Thurman had to say with the situation that happened, why him and Terence Crawford didn't fight, what really happened. And we're going to talk about that also.
There's a few things. One, you didn't beat up a champion, bro. I don't think that Errol Spence would beat Sean Porter. Okay. The old saying is, one day you got it and the next day you don't, this is just for athletes in general. When Errol Spence did his last performance, I think we all saw it, man. What you are today is not the fighter that you were yesterday. And I don't think it's his fault. I think injuries and life caught up to the kid. I don't really think it's his fault. It just happens like that. Ben Getty told me this stuff growing up, man. One day you got it, one day you don't. Say what you want about Keith Thurman. Y'all can say what you want, but a lot of real ones know Thurman versus that Spence, same scenario, bro. How do you get out of the 6th round?
So what I just played, obviously, was some of what Keith Thurman had to say. He did say a lot more, but he did also give Terence Crawford his props. But he just feels that, seeing Errol Spence throughout his career, we didn't see Errol Spence at his best, and we didn't see the same Errol Spence. He feels that, Errol Spence is pretty much done. Now, I disagree when he says that. I think that Errol Spence had some things going on, and he wasn't able to be the best version of himself that night. I mean, you look at the man in the locker room, he didn't look the same coming out to the ring, and he didn't fight the same. Say what you want to say, but it is what it is. Now, moving along. Keith Thurman also spoke on the situation with Terence Crawford, claiming that Keith Thurman had been ducking him throughout his whole entire career, that, he tried to fight Keith Thurman and Keith Thurman didn't want to fight him, and Thurman addressed that situation. Now, I'm going to let y'all know exactly what happened because I know what happened from point A to point Z in this whole situation with Keith Thurman and Terence Crawford. For one, you had Terence Bud Crawford over there with Top Rank. Right? You had Keith Thurman with the PBC. Now, when Bud Crawford came to the 147-pound division, he wasn't calling out Errol Spence. He was calling out Keith Thurman. He was saying that Keith Thurman is a top dog. That's who he wants to fight. But at that point in time, if you know the situation, you know that PBC and Top Rank, they had beef going on at that point in time, right? They weren't doing no business with each other. None of their top name fighters was fighting the top name fighter from the other promotional company. Matter of fact, Bob Arum, he had sued Al Heyman. So they weren't doing no business together. Bob Arum and Golden Boy Promotion, Oscar De La Hoya, right? They came together and they sued Al Heyman because they felt that Al Heyman was paying his fighters under the table and acted at the same time as a advisor and a promoter. So they had a big lawsuit against Al Heyman. So obviously they wasn't doing no business together. So that's where the sides of the street, when people start talking about, the wrong side of the street. Matter of fact, Tim Bradley was the first one that started talking about the wrong side of the street because Errol Spence was calling Tim Bradley out around that time. And Tim Bradley was like, we know that PBC fighters don't do business with Top Rank. The two companies don't do business with each other, right? He's on the wrong side of the street. Tim Bradley came up with that, right? Top Rank fighter. Terence Crawford's best buddy. This is a fact. So at that point in time, for a long time, they didn't do business with each other. Matter of fact, the first main fight that they came together to do business was in 2020. We're not talking about small time fighters that really don't have a big name that the promotional companies really are not that high on. We're talking about big name marquee fighters that can make big name fights. The first fight that they did together, right, after all of that beef for 5 years was Deontay Wilder and Tyson Fury. That's a fact. Now, what Keith Thurman says, Keith Thurman is saying that they contacted him in 2019 and they tried to make a fight, right, with Terence Crawford and Keith Thurman. He says that at that point in time, he already had got offered a Manny Pacquiao fight. So it was his choice to choose Terence Crawford or Manny Pacquiao. And basically what he said he wasn't going to turn down no Pacquiao fight. He chose Manny Pacquiao, right? Of course, Manny Pacquiao was with the PBC. Terence Crawford was with Top Rank. With Manny Pacquiao, he had a much bigger name than Bud Crawford. He was going to make much bigger money with Manny Pacquiao than he was with Bud Crawford. So it was a no-brainer, right? The same Manny Pacquiao that Terence Crawford was chasing behind trying to get a fight with for like 7 or 8 years. The same Manny Pacquiao that Terence Crawford was ready to turn down an Errol Spence fight for. Yeah, that Manny Pacquiao. Don't forget that. Now fast forward. We all remember when Terence Crawford was calling out Keith Thurman a couple of years ago, right? Keith Thurman was coming off a 3-year layoff. Bud Crawford was calling out Keith Thurman like, yeah, let's fight. Let's make it happen. And the man was coming off a 3-year layoff. Keith Thurman said, we can fight in July. We can get it on in July. Because at that point in time, Keith Thurman was looking to come back for a tune-up type fight because he had been out of the ring for 3 years and he chose to fight Mario Barrios, right? During that same time, Terence Crawford was on Keith Thurman's helmet calling him out. And he said, no, I'll fight you in July. We can get it on in July. These are facts. He goes on to fight Mario Barrios, and then Keith Thurman tried to fight Terence Crawford. Terence Crawford refused to fight Keith Thurman. Also, not only that, the PBC was trying to sign Terence Bud Crawford to a 2-fight deal. The first fight was supposed to be a fight with Keith Thurman, and then if he got past Keith Thurman, he was supposed to fight Errol Spence. He refused to fight Keith Thurman, right, and said he was only going to sign or do business with the PBC to fight Errol Spence. He said he didn't want no fights in between, and he refused to fight Keith Thurman. These are facts. Now, it's funny to me how you wanted to fight Keith Thurman coming off a 3-year layoff, but then once he got a tune-up, you refused to fight him. And you said, nope, you only gonna fight Errol Spence. You and Errol Spence went into negotiations, right? When they continued to try to get you to fight Keith Thurman first. During negotiations, you were refusing to sign with the PBC for a 2-fight deal with Keith Thurman and Errol Spence. Then you ended up taking a tune-up. You ended up taking a tune-up with David I've been sneezing. When you could have took a tune-up and fought Keith Thurman. I don't really want to call Keith Thurman a tune-up, but you could have took a fight in between and fought Keith Thurman in June or July, like Keith Thurman said. But you decide to fight David I've been sneezing all the way in December. So the bottom line is, if Terence Crawford really wanted to fight Keith Thurman, he could have fought Keith Thurman. PBC was offering him to fight, and he didn't want to take it. So Terence Crawford trying to spin the narrative, making it seem like that everybody on the PBC was ducking him. That was all BS, and he know it. But, that's what Terence Crawford does best, lie and contradict himself. Anyway, y'all make sure that y'all hit my like button. Subscribe to the channel if you're not already subbed to the channel. And y'all already know how I do. There you go, talking that boxing again, and I'm gone.